What's going on, everyone? Back with another episode of Stuff and Things, and today we're going to be expanding the electric skateboard quiver just a little bit more. We're going to be taking a look at something that I have not yet dipped my toes into, but I've been getting requests for this a lot as of recently. We are, of course, talking about all-terrain electric skateboards. Now, if you've done any research on these, chances are you will know that these can be a little pricey compared to their just street-driven counterparts. I think the board that we're taking a look at today is going to be a great starting point for the all-terrain electric skateboard market. It doesn't seem to be super expensive like some of those top-tier boards, but at the same time, it looks like it has some pretty good specs to it, so I'm pretty excited. I'm going to be doing a lot of comparing and contrasting with some other boards out there as we take a look at the Raldey Carbon AT. This thing is a beast. Now let's start off with the deck, because that is obviously where the Carbon AT gets its name. This thing is comprised of a Japanese T700 carbon fiber. It keeps the board lightweight for how large this thing is, but at the same time it still remains that rigidity because it is carbon fiber. This thing is belt driven by two 1500 watt motors, and with the 165 millimeter wheels it should be able to get me up to a top speed of a claimed 30 miles per hour. This is a fairly early version of the second gen of this Carbon AT board, so the battery that is in here right now is a Sanyo GA battery. There is a little bit of a story behind that, so I will hit on that in a second. And with that battery, if I'm riding in ideal conditions, I should get about 15.5 miles, so we're gonna see about that. This thing ships with a pretty unique remote with a little slidey thumbstick on there, the AC wall charger, USB charger for the remote, skate tool, and all of the typical accessories. Since the deck is carbon fiber, it should allow a max weight of a rider that is 280 pounds. I get asked questions a lot about what board would be good for bigger dudes, and it seems like this one might fit the bill. And then the whole thing is sitting on some massive, about 10-inch wide, double kingpin trucks, and that should make this riding experience more unique than it already is. So that's a quick rundown of the specs of this massive beast here, and I'm excited to ride it. But first, a couple more impressions. I do want to talk about that battery really quick. So, like I mentioned, this was a pretty early version of the second gen of this board. And after it was sent to me for testing, Raldey actually reached out to me and they said, hey, before you test that thing, we've been running some more tests on our own of the batteries, and we decided that we wanted to switch that out. I don't know what issues they were actually having, but I'm glad they were being proactive about it. So they sent me out a whole new battery array. This thing is massive. This is what it looks like right here. So that is the old one. I took the new one and installed it, and it wasn't actually that hard. This is not something that a normal consumer is going to have to do. Like I mentioned, I got this pretty early, so I was able to do it myself. But these are shipping with the new and improved batteries now. So what I did was simply peeled up the grip tape, peeled up the foam underneath it as well, and sort of cut out the whole battery area. The ESC lives in the back here underneath this plate. So I basically took the whole thing down to a shell, swapped out that battery, put everything back in place, and it's looking good as new, so I'm okay with that. So other than that, this thing seems like it's put together pretty well. The wheels and tires are pretty interesting. As you can tell, they're sort of using this like urethane type of tire and a wheel rather than an actual inflatable tire. I'm not sure if I would prefer this or an actual inflatable tire because I haven't ridden one of those yet. I think this is definitely going to keep the ride smooth when you're on pavement, but when you're getting off-road, it might get a little bit bumpy because there isn't a whole lot to absorb any vibration. That being said though, you'll never get a flat with these tires. The double kingpin trucks on here are massive and wide, so the stability should be pretty good. I probably will need to do a little bit of fine tuning with those. And then moving back here to the motors and the belts. You can see the massive gears here and the belts that run all the way around them. The plastic motor covers should do a good job of keeping things out of there. But if you look in close right here, you can actually see the internal gear, and it seems kind of exposed to me when compared to some other belt-driven boards out there. So I'm not sure if that's going to cause an issue or not, but I guess we're gonna find out when we go test this thing. So with that being said, let's head into town and see what the Raldey Carbon AT is all about. All right guys, here we go. Setting this thing on the ground, look how much clearance that has compared to other boards. I know that just standing on this thing is gonna feel a little bit weird, so I am going to bring my T-tool with me. That way I can adjust these double kingpin trucks. You can already see just how much this thing flexes when you turn it. These are gonna be a little bit different to adjust when compared to a normal truck because obviously you have two different bushings here, so one of them is going to flex before the other. I'm just gonna kind of guess with this one for now, and hopefully that'll be good, at least for the meantime. Turn the power on, power to the remote on. Really nice LCD screen. I know the camera and the frame rate is kind of messing it up, but I have the remote battery, the board battery, which mode I'm in. Tap this one, now I'm in mode 1. You got an odometer and a trip. You may be able to see, I have 3 miles on here already. After I did that battery swap, I wanted to make sure that this thing was working. That way when I brought it out here, I would be able to actually ride. Alright, definitely a little squirrely to get used to when you're not used to riding off-road. I'm gonna stick with the streets for now. I'm over here at my normal starting point, and we're gonna get the top speed and hill test out of the way first. Right here in the low mode, I'm going full speed, and I can already tell that this speedo is wrong. It says I'm doing 14 miles per hour, but I'll check my app at the end to see how fast we're actually going. Brakes in mode 1 seem pretty good. If I press this light button, that's how I get into the second mode, but if I double tap it, there's actually a little light there. Not sure how much that's actually gonna do at night, but it's there. All right, mode 2. I can ride down these terribly paved alleys without a worry now. Acceleration feels good. I'm already liking this controller. It's really unique, kind of unlike everything else. I'm typically used to a scrolly thumb wheel, but this is pretty nice. Now before I go to mode 3, I'm definitely going to want to tighten these trucks because I'm about to test out the top speed. All right, I put a full turn on each. We're gonna bump up to mode 3, which is the fastest mode. Let's see how it does. Here we are at top speed. Controller says we're going 27. Doesn't quite feel like we're doing 27, but it's a good speed. It's a lot smoother now that I have tuned the double kingpin trucks, and the direct drive from the belts feels really nice as well. Brakes are very strong when you're comparing to a hub motor board. And that brings us to the hill test. Now they claim that this board is capable of climbing 25% grades. The belts should give it a little bit of an advantage towards something like this, and we're about to find out. First section, no problem at all. And for the second section, this is where the hill gets a little bit steeper. So far it's doing it pretty well. Controller says we're doing 21, but again, I don't think that's quite right. Maybe something with the gear ratio or the wheel size, tire size has something to do with that, but definitely has no problem going up that pretty steep and long hill. One thing that I'm noticing is that you can really hear this board. When I'm cranking up, going full speed like this thing is humming for sure. To me, that's a pro, because I like it. I think it sounds cool, but to some people, they might not like that. These trucks are nice and loose, exactly what you would expect out of a double kingpin setup. And because the trucks are so wide, it does also feel pretty stable, even though I'm sitting like a couple inches off the ground. Again, with these big tires sucking up all these cracks and potholes, typically it's a little sketchy riding on this street in particular, but these wheels are doing a good job. I'm pretty confident in these brakes since it is a belt-driven board. Yeah, that'll definitely bring me to a stop at the bottom here. Now, instead of my typical distance test, what I'm going to do is head over to the trails where I test one wheels and other things that are capable of riding off-road. It's relatively flat and it should give me a pretty good mixture of terrains since this thing is capable of riding them all. One thing I immediately noticed on that little detour through like the side of a baseball field there is that if there is anything that would make the surface you're riding on not smooth, and I'm not talking about grass, but there were a lot of tree roots and acorns there, that's when this thing gets squirrely. There is a lot of power to this and it's pretty instant. It doesn't have the sharpest acceleration curve. But if you're not very particular about where you're keeping your thumb on that throttle, the wheels will tend to spin out. So it would be best to stay on something sort of like this trail here, which is sort of like this soft gravel material. Some of these rocks are getting a little bit bigger here, but let's see how it does down here. Whoa! Okay, so trail-wise, this thing's doing fine. One thing that I'm noting when compared to some other off-road style options out there is that it's not quite as smooth. I think that is partially due to the wheel and tire choice. Like I mentioned, these things are not inflatable. It's like a hard type of rubber, so you're not gonna get any flats, but at the same time, there isn't a whole lot to suck up any of the vibration from an uneven surface like this trail. I've only been on here for like a quarter mile at this point, and I can already tell that my legs are getting vibrated. If I keep this up, it probably wouldn't be very comfortable, but it's doing a good job. Now, if I start to put in some baby carbs here, even real gentle carbs, this thing really starts to kick out on you. That is sort of what you can expect from something like this. It's like driving a rear wheel car in stones or rocks or in the snow. I don't think I can push this thing to its full fun potential while I'm holding a camera out and trying to tell you guys how it feels, but I think once I set this camera down, I can rip around on some of these trails and sort of like fishtail around. I think it would be fun. Well, it finally happened. I don't think the camera picked it up because I was like too far away in the distance. But I just had my first gnarly slam while testing out an electric skateboard. My hands are pretty calloused, so I don't think that will need stitches, but that one shook me up pretty good. There's a rock embedded in my hand. I'm definitely gonna have to get somewhere and clean this out sooner than later, but the test is going to continue for now. So like I said, I would be able to kind of kick the tail out and like fishtail around a little bit while I wasn't holding my camera. As soon as I set this thing down to film some of those B-roll shots, I got a little wicked with it. I was cruising, maybe doing like, I don't know, 15 to 20 miles an hour, came over a hump and it started to slide out one way. I tried to correct by going the other way and I just completely lost it. Came down right on my arm. It didn't feel too great. However, the board is doing pretty good for being off-road. Now I'm gonna finish riding this trail carefully back to the streets, and then I'll finish out the distance test somewhere in town. And yeah, I think I'll take it easy for the rest of this one. If I said that the wind on this arm didn't sting a little bit, I would be lying to you guys. Here we go. Nice, smooth, safe parking lot where I can test the distance on this thing. So I've just been doing this quarter-mile loop for the past like 15 minutes or so, and I finally got a warning from the controller. It gave a good vibrate and an actual indication on the LCD screen letting me know that there is 25% battery left. I'm not sure what the battery sag is going to be on a board like this with that new upgraded battery, so I'm gonna start to head back towards the car, and then I will give you guys some of my final thoughts on the Raldey Carbon AT. Alright guys, back for some of my final thoughts on the Raldey Carbon AT. First thing we obviously have to do is check out the app. So I ended up going a total distance of 11.83 miles, and when I look at the remote, I still have 25% left. There is 1 bar of battery, so I think if I was up to riding more, I'm still kind of shaken up after this fall, I think I probably could have gotten close to that 15-mile mark. I rode for a total time of 1 hour and 22 minutes, an average moving speed of about 10.66 miles per hour. And then the last spec, which I think they may have skewed just a little bit based off of what they advertise, I went a recorded max speed of 22.24 miles per hour, which is a good top speed in my opinion, and it felt like I was going about that fast. But I obviously did not get close to that advertised 30, so I'm not exactly sure why that is so far off, but it is. Now, final thoughts on the board itself. I think it is constructed really well. It has good power. Actually, let's talk about this controller. So like I mentioned, it's pretty unique. It's a slim design. It feels okay in my hand, but one thing that I'm actually a pretty big fan of is the thumbstick on here. It has a very heavy spring in it, so whenever you want to let off, you simply let go and that thing flies back to center. Same thing with the brakes. It does feel kind of plasticky, but at the same time, it feels good. Oftentimes I mention a confidence-inspiring controller, and I think this kind of falls in line with that. It feels good. Now, as far as the board goes, as a skateboard, surprisingly, it was really nice. And I'm talking just like riding on the street. It was sort of surprising because it's a weird shape and form factor compared to some other boards. You got that super wide stance with the double kingpin trucks in the front and the rear. Although the board sits really high, it still felt pretty grounded as long as I was on some asphalt or concrete. These tires felt more like a traditional skate wheel than an actual tire because of the route that they went, having them be a hard plastic and then rubber on the outside. I haven't tested an all-terrain board with inflatable tires to notice a difference, but as far as riding this thing on the street goes, I think it did pretty well. Now, when it comes to this being an all-terrain board, I think that's where my judgment was sort of skewed a little bit. A lot of times you see advertisements of people riding all-terrain boards on gnarly trails. They're ripping around in these exotic locations and there's dust flying everywhere and it looks like a whole lot of fun. That may be the case for some boards, however, with this one, I think this is marketed a little bit differently than I had pictured in my head. As an AT board, that means this thing can ride in all terrains. However, I don't necessarily think that that means that this should be ridden on a trail full time. My reason for that being is that there's really no suspension on here. So you're starting with an already very stiff deck because it is carbon fiber, and then you get that super fluid carviness of the double kingpin trucks. You have the really stiff wheels that are not inflatable, so you really don't have any suspension on this thing, meaning that the only thing sucking up any bumps or cracks is going to be your feet and your legs. Now, can you ride this thing on trails? Sure. I mean, you guys saw me doing it, although I fell really hard. And initially going into this, an all-terrain board in my mind was something that you could just take out on a trail and rip around on it. However, with something like this that doesn't really have a suspension system, it is really stiff and rigid. I think the all-terrain in this sense is more of a board that you can ride down the sidewalk and then cut off through some grass to get over to another trail if you want to. If you're cruising down some busted up alleys like I was doing, you don't really have to worry all that much about falling into potholes because these massive wheels are going to allow you to roll through and over stuff like that as opposed to a traditional skateboard wheel. Now, when it comes to riding this thing off-road when you're in gravel, similar to this right here, these are some pretty big rocks, some of which are stuck in my hand right now. When you get onto terrain like this, since there's really no suspension and the wheels are kind of hard, you're going to get kickouts, and if you're going a significant amount of speed, you're gonna fishtail, and then the combination of the flowy trucks and everything, chances are you're gonna get knocked off balance like I was. So I definitely dig the idea of an all-terrain board because a lot of times I will opt for something like a one wheel. That way if I don't know where I'm going and I'm out adventuring, I can cut across some grass if I have to get to another sidewalk or another piece of asphalt. On a regular skateboard, you can't really do that. However, on something like this, you can absolutely do that. I think this is going to be a good adventure board for someone who maybe lives in a rural area similar to where I live, and you don't always have the nicest pavement and you're not really in a city, or even if you are in a city, there's a lot of potholes and rocks and some things that normal skateboards can't always ride over. Something like this will definitely give you that ability. However, when it comes to straight up trail riding, I think there might be some better options, but you're getting into boards then that have suspension systems and big inflatable tires and things like that. Maybe in the future I will have to test something like that, but for now, this board for me kind of falls in that middle ground. I mean, it's right there in the name. It's all-terrain, but it's not an off-road board. So testing this thing out now, it sort of changed my whole mentality on that. This isn't a mountain board or an off-road board, it's just simply an all-terrain board. If you are riding places where things might get a little bit squirrely, you got some grass and rocks, I think this would be a good option for someone who's riding in places like that. So I think that's gonna be it now for my thoughts on the Raldey Carbon AT. I'm still kind of scatterbrained a little bit from that fall. Luckily it didn't hit my head, but you should always wear your helmet, and that's exactly why. I'm gonna head inside now and clean all of the rocks out of here. This one is looking really gross. How's that? Ugh, sorry if that makes anyone like squeamish. But yeah, if you guys have any questions on this board, let me know in the comments down below. I'll leave links to where you can find this and more specs, things like that. And if you're new to the channel, consider clicking subscribe. I make new videos every week. That's gonna be all for today. So as always, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you in the next one.